Hello, Stork'd family. This is Julia, and I'm excited to introduce our next guest, Genevieve Jaffe. And before I do, I want you to close your eyes and imagine for a second that you're becoming a parent for the first time. Maybe you're in a hospital room, and you are holding this snuggly, sweet, delicious little munchkin in your arms for the first time ever. But before you can really enjoy those snuggles, you have to fill out a tremendous amount of paperwork in order to prove that you are this baby's parent. Maybe the baby shares your DNA, and yet you might be fingerprinted. You might have to go through a whole bunch of legal hurdles. You might even have to have a home visit where somebody makes sure your home is safe and also that your finances are in good order. And this is because even though the baby is your biology, you're a gay parent. Maybe just down the hall, there's a straight couple and they don't have to go through those things. They can just snuggle their baby and sign the birth certificate and be on their way. This is second parent adoption, and it is a very complicated and frustrating legal thing that some parents have to face due to their sexual orientation, due to the way in which our legal system is set up. That's where Genevieve Jaffe comes in. She runs a company called Connecting Rainbows, which has a bunch of legal and other resources for the gay community, particularly around their family building journey. And Genevieve learned about second parent adoption personally when she and her wife did reciprocal IVF. And so this is Genevieve's story about creating her family, the reciprocal IVF process, what she learned along the way as a lawyer who was surprised about the second parent adoption, and how she's sharing those resources with the community through Connecting Rainbows. It's a really interesting episode. It opened my eyes to something I had no clue about, and I highly encourage you to take a listen. If you enjoy it, like any Stork'd episode, please subscribe to our newsletter, share with friends, and leave us a really good review because we thrive on good reviews.
Thank you so much for joining me today on Stork'd, the podcast, where we explore the many ways people build and define family. I'm really very excited to have this conversation with you today.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And we've been getting to know each other a little bit over the past month or so. But for those audience members who are new to all that is Gena, tell us about yourself. Who are you? What do you like to do? Anything that feels important and defining for you.
Yeah. So I'm Gena Jaffe. My wife and I met on the subway of New York City back in 2013. We have 2 kiddos. We did reciprocal IVF, and I know that we'll kind of get into those details. And what do I like? I like shopping and Starbucks. That defines me.
What's your go-to Starbucks order?
Grande Nitro Cold Brew with sweet cream.
Oh my goodness. I love it.
All year long, I go with the ice. Apparently, I just learned that that's a gay thing. I had no idea, but apparently.
I haven't heard that. It's definitely a New England thing. You know,
the stereotype.
That is so funny. Yeah, I've just recently discovered they have this cold brew with like brown sugar nonsense, oat milk amazingness. Yeah, like I think it's Zennial or millennial drink, and I'm all about it.
You know what? I don't care. I don't go for the PSL.
Well, you know what? I like that as an intro or a segue because the pumpkin spice latte has become this signifier for being very basic. And while I don't think that's true, I also don't find you to be basic in the slightest. So it's a perfect time to dive into that a little bit. You started your introduction by saying how you met your wife. I would love to hear a little bit more about what was going on in your life at the time and how you first connected with your partner.
I was a corporate lawyer in New York City and had been seeing a girl who was all sorts of bad and wrong for me, but you know how that goes. And it was the day after my birthday. And so that night, because it was a Friday night, I was going out with some friends and I left the office early, which means I left the office at like 7 because I was just really sad about this other relationship. And so I was going downtown and I got on the subway and I saw this girl walk in front of me, and I never went on the F train. Like it was just not part of my normal routine. And I just felt drawn to her. I don't know why. I don't know what it was. And I mean, you're in New York City, you got your headphones in, your head is down. You don't talk to people, you know, she was with 2 other people, but I don't know. I just had this pull. And so I said to myself, if she doesn't get off at the next stop, I'm going over there. And they didn't get off. And I saw one of the girls had a bag that said the New York City Dyke March. And I was like, that's my intro. So I was like, I like your bag, which was this like cotton tote bag of like random whatever. And she's like, oh, thanks. I was like, I need to out myself. I was like, oh, I'm such a bad lesbian. I've never heard of the Dyke March before. And then all of a sudden, like, the whole group is like, what? Who is this girl? And we just got to talking. And the funny thing is that the girl that I had been seeing was simultaneously trying to date my now wife. So
oh, that's so funny because I was originally thinking this is a Hallmark movie in the making. This is Disney meet cute on the subway. It's what all of our fantasies as single people are made of. One day I'll just bump into my future partner. And here you are.
Did, right.
Yeah. You did all those things.
Apparently it's the book, like not my story. But yeah, somebody wrote about lesbians meeting on a subway. And I was like, I need to read this book.
I read another book that the author wrote and it was incredible. It was about the son of the US president falls in love with the prince in the UK. And it was just like, yeah, it was adorable.
I have to read that.
And thank God, right? Like mainstream gay love stories are becoming more prevalent because even as a straight woman, I really enjoy reading them. I don't need to read about straight people falling in love. It's about anyone falling in love,
Yeah. Just love.
Okay, so we're starting from this enviable moment where you meet this incredible person and you're a corporate lawyer at the time, and you have now since pivoted from corporate law into a number of other things. Do you want to tell us a little bit about those?
A lot of things. Yeah. So I was miserable as a corporate lawyer. I was working all the time. And my wife at the time was a business coach and had been an entrepreneur for years and was like, why don't you start your own business? And I was like, I can't do that. Well, 6 months after we met, I quit my job and started my own law practice. So that happened. And we got married 14 months after we met. Like it was like a very typical lesbian U-Haul. It was a stereotype. So I started my own law practice and then we had kids. And even though I was a lawyer, I didn't know about kind of the legal rights that we would have or not have as parents, as we are, two female. We had to use donor sperm, which means that only one of us was the legal parent.
I want to stop there. Okay. So there's a lot to learn here. First thing you're saying is that you've had this amazing love story, which should be available to anyone. A lot of my single friends will listen to this and roll their eyes going, it's not available to me. But anyway, and now you're saying that the legal implications of meeting, falling in love, and having kids with your wife are different for you than they are for me as a straight woman. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
So you use donor sperm and then you find out that only one of you can be the parent. What does that mean?
It's different in every state. In our situation, my wife and I did what's called reciprocal IVF. We took her eggs, we used donor sperm from a cryobank, and then I carried our kids, which we delivered in New Jersey. The person who is giving birth is considered the legal parent of that child, regardless of genetics. So that means that my wife, the genetic mom of our children, had to adopt our kids in order to have the same legal rights as me, which makes absolutely no sense. And I do want to note that since we've been through this, New Jersey has updated their laws. Our kids are 5 and almost 2. But that being said, you still need a judgment from a court if you are going to use donor gamete and you're not a single parent by choice.
Yeah. And this is interesting because it has legal implications, not just for the gay community, but for anyone who's doing embryo adoption or anyone who's doing surrogacy. We've had a couple of people who've gone through the surrogacy process or been surrogates themselves on this podcast who say, I'm limited to where I can be physically because if I accidentally give birth or my surrogate accidentally gives birth in that state, I don't get to have this kid.
Yeah.
The legal adoption process, it's not so simple as you go to the registrar in the hospital and you say, this kid is mine, and you sign a document. What is it all about?
So this is like the misconception that people have, and lawyers too. A birth certificate is an administrative document governed by the laws of the state. It is not a legal document. So yes, when your child is born, you can put whoever you want on a birth certificate. Like my wife and I were both on there. That's great. But that didn't prove that we were both the actual legal parents. Because if you look at a cis female couple, we clearly didn't make this child together in terms of using our own genetic material. So they're like, okay, well, clearly there's someone else out there. We want to ensure that that person doesn't have any parental rights. It's just like a whole nother hoopla. So what we had to do, again, every state is different in what it requires, was fill out a ton of paperwork. My wife had to get fingerprinted, do a background check, and then present documents to the court. We had to go to court. for them to say, yes, you are the legal parents. It's extra money, it's extra time, it's extra stress. Now, yes, of course, we can be grateful that we can do this. I don't even know when it became that we could do it, but not long ago, we couldn't do that. So yes, we're grateful. Some states require home study, which is somebody coming in and saying, let me see that you are fit to parent your child. They do financials. They interview people. It is like, that's very invasive, I find. And it does happen in some states at this point right now.
So you're basically being told you may or may not be worthy enough to be your own child's parent.
Yeah.
This discovery of yours has led you down a really interesting career path, helping other people navigate all the complexities of creating children in the gay community. Tell us about that.
Yeah. I need a lot of projects. I have a social media business as well. So I have a large Instagram following, and I was kind of documenting our journey for having our kids and then the second parent adoption process. And when I had posted about the second parent adoption piece, and I want to note that in some states it's called step parent adoption, people were like, what? Why are you doing this? And people kind of freaked out. And then people would comment and be like, well, I talked to a lawyer in my state who said I didn't have to. And I was like, well, your lawyer is wrong. So what I came to find is that, again, the gay queer community don't really know that this is a thing. And then the problem on top of that is that a lot of lawyers don't either, because this is a very niched area of law, fertility law. What I decided to do was create my own directory of attorneys who specialize in this type of law and are also competent enough to work with the gay and queer community. Like, our legal needs are different. Fertility, as it is a very older white man space. I didn't want that, like what my community had.
You mean the experts in the fertility space tend to be doctors who are white men and a little bit older?
Yeah. And a lot of the older lawyers who aren't as with the times. So I decided to make my own and find like the best of the best. So that was kind of where I started. And the first attorney I spoke with is a lesbian lawyer down in Florida, and like just connected me to all the right people who really specialize in this area of law. So my directory is mostly women, a lot of queer individuals that this is their focus. This is their life work, doing fertility surrogacy law. And on top of that, have like legislative efforts in their states to progress where we are. Very quickly after I decided to do this directory, which was back in January of 2021, still in its infancy, everything just kind of exploded. Then we now have like a fertility clinic directory of those that are gender inclusive and LGBTQ plus friendly. So they come recommended from within the community. Because when you're going to a provider to embark on this very emotional journey, you want to make sure that they're not going to be like, oh, where's your husband? Or who's the mother? And it happens a lot. And especially for those who are non-binary and trans that are going through this, you got to make sure that they are treating you the way that you should be treated. We have that. Then we built out a surrogacy resource section for those who need to go through surrogacy. I work with some of the sperm banks on helping navigate how to find donor sperm. I also have become an advocate for the donor conceived community. I had 2 donor conceived children. So I've become an advocate for that. It's really just taken on a life of its own that I literally never planned, imagined. It was an accident.
I love that. I love the accidental life purpose, when you find something that is so meaningful and also so impactful.
Yeah.
Using a little bit of humor and a lot of frankness in this conversation. But I'm curious about the underlying experiences that you were having. If we go back to your fertility journey as a whole, you talk about reciprocal IVF as it was like a foregone conclusion. We did this. Was it a difficult choice to decide that that was the right path for you guys? Or how did that come to be?
Yeah. Well, back up. I skipped all this. So the original plan was that my wife and I were each going to carry. And so we thought we would do IUI. My wife is 3 years older than me, so she was going to go first. And she has anxiety and couldn't be on the meds that she was on. And so when she was going through the weaning process, it was not good. And basically we got to the point where she could not be pregnant. That put a bit of a pause on where we were. And I had learned from Instagram of an account that did reciprocal IVF. And I was like, why don't I carry your eggs? Because she didn't want to give up being pregnant and having a genetic child. So once I offered that, it took a day, and then she was like, yeah, let's do it. And then it's been the best thing ever for her just because she like saw what I experienced through pregnancy and delivery and all of that. So that was our first child. And then I always just assumed that I would have my own, use my own eggs. But my son couldn't have been any more my son. And it didn't matter to me that he didn't have my blue eyes or, like those things that you picture and imagine didn't matter anymore. So when we were planning our second, I kind of had to sit down and decide, what are we doing? We have embryos left. We have a bunch of sperm left. Is it important to me? My wife was like, look, I'd love to have another biological genetic child, but I can't take this from you if that's what you really want. And I ultimately decided I didn't need that. So we went back to use our embryos. We had 2 left. The one did not survive the thaw. The second one did not take. So we're back to square one. So then we were like, all right, let's just go through another egg retrieval. Like, let's go. We already decided this is the path. Went to do the egg retrieval. And turns out my wife needed a hysterectomy.
The word turns out is interesting. How did that come about? How did you discover that this hysterectomy was needed?
So she had a fibroid that we knew about from before, and it grew exponentially to the point where they couldn't even see her ovaries on the ultrasound. So she had to get an MRI, and it was just so large. She didn't want to carry a child ever. And so they were like, we might as well just do the hysterectomy. And it was a good decision because the doctor said I would have had to do one anyway. Like if they would have gone in to just try to get the fibroid, she's like, I wouldn't have been able to. It was a good call. They kept her ovaries, so we could still use her eggs. And then she also wouldn't go into menopause. She had a recovery period, of course. So during that recovery period, I was like, all right, maybe this is a sign. So we did IUI. We did 3 rounds of IUI unsuccessfully. And so then I was like, oh, wait, that's our sign then too. So once she was recovered, we did another egg retrieval and then conceived our daughter.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love all the ins and outs. And I really think this moment of coming to terms with what is valued and valuable and important to you is interesting. Was it a lot of soul wrestling to determine that this isn't necessarily something you need to be able to carry your own genetic child? Or was it a really simple decision?
I think it was easier than I would have imagined if I didn't have my son. Like if I had to decide this up front, if we were like only having one kid and we were like, nope, you have to give that up. But because we had our son, and I think it also really helped that I carried and then I nursed our son for over a year and I'm still nursing our daughter, that I have that connection that definitely helped, I think, for me be like, no, I don't need that because I did really want to carry and be pregnant. But like looking back, absolutely not. I don't need we're done having kids, but I do not need to use my eggs. I don't need that.
I think it's interesting. You're simultaneously saying, I don't need this. This is something that is one component of the fertility or birth process to conceive a child that some people want or need, and I don't need it. And at the same time, you're saying the words give up. My wife didn't want to give up the opportunity to have either the ability to carry or her genetic material. And you're saying, I didn't feel like I was giving anything up. That's a really charged statement, give up. As I'm saying this, as I'm noticing you use that term, is that calling anything to you emotionally? Are you saying, yeah, give up feels right. It felt like a loss. Or is it just antiquated terminology that we're using in the fertility space?
Well, I think that at the time, that's become kind of our story.
Yeah.
And part of the narrative, because at the time she did feel like she was giving something up. She always wanted to be pregnant. She always wanted to be a mom. And given what happened, it was not possible. And so she definitely felt a loss then. Now, she would not view it that way at all. Like even after we had our son, she's like, no way I'm doing that. You'll do the next one again. It was just like, even her sister was like, I wish I could delegate pregnancy. Like she was like, this is amazing. I just delegated this. But at the time, it was absolutely a loss for her. That experience that she had always anticipated.
Yeah, interesting. I like the way you guys are compartmentalizing different parts of the experience. One is providing genetic material. The other is carrying and nursing a child. And then, of course, there's the co-parenting and parenting children. And it sounds to me like you're both happy with the respective pieces you've chosen to own.
Yeah, totally.
One of the things we have in common, you and I, is that we've both had to choose a sperm donor. My choice was a little different because it was just me choosing, right? I engaged people in the decision-making process, but ultimately it came down to me. How did you and your wife think about choosing a sperm donor? Were you on the same page the whole way through? What was that decision process like?
Yeah, it was not that difficult for us. I think we had a list of qualities that we wanted, characteristics. I'm very short. So we were like, he's got to be tall because we figured we would be using my eggs. And so we're like, we need to offset that. And then I think that like for us, the most important thing was mental health because I have depression, she has anxiety. And we were like, we can't add anything else to the mix. So, we would kind of narrow things down from like, the height. And I always wanted a blue-eyed kid because I have blue eyes. I didn't end up with kids with blue eyes, but that's okay. I love them and they're perfect. So we did blue eyes for the donor. We didn't care. Like education wasn't like a thing for us. We're like, yeah, please have graduated high school, but very successful people have not graduated high school. So we were really interested in the medical aspect. And then we found that a lot of really cute babies turned out looking a little bit like serial killers. So at that stage, just being honest, what
does a serial killer look like? When you're saying some babies grow up to look like serial killers,
just
what are you
like,
seeing?
They're looking a little rough, a little ragged,
Yeah.
a little scruffy, not so cleaned up. And we decided we were only going to choose a donor where we could see adult pictures. So we paid the extra money to do that. And we did look through a few different banks, but pretty quickly decided on the guy that we used. For us, what kind of sealed the deal was that he said his biggest goal in life is to help others feel less alone.
Oh, that's so lovely.
You're like, okay, he's got a good heart.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that you can teach your children, but I think that things that can come innately like that or just have that essence and soul of that person is a big deal. Yeah. And at the time, there was not any pregnancies. So he was new. We have come to learn that there's one older kid by 1 month.
That's interesting. So there was a lot that I didn't think about in the process. I like his mission to make people feel less alone because it's so hard to evaluate the softer things. You get information, but it's all very clinical. And so figuring out what's the metric by which I'm going to determine if this person is a good person or a kind person is really tricky. I did think about kindness and had a hard time evaluating it. But the thing I didn't think about as much as I could have or should have was siblings. I didn't have an opinion about how many were out there, how many I felt comfortable with, how many I didn't feel comfortable with. It's something to come to terms with. How do you think about siblings?
Yeah. Well, I do want to note that the most important thing for us on top of all the things that we chose was that the donor was open. So we intentionally did not choose an anonymous donor. We didn't feel it was our decision to take that away from our children. So we wanted an open donor. In terms of the siblings, that was the hardest piece for me as the non-genetic parent, knowing that there were other kids out there and other people out there that shared something with my child that I could never share. So I was not interested in finding the siblings for a while. I knew that there was the registry and I knew that there were ways that you could find them. But it wasn't until a year ago that I was like, okay, I'm ready. And we connected with some and then found out there was a Facebook group. So at this point now, there's 11 kids, all from a couple months to 5. And it's interesting to see them. I mean, they don't look a ton of alike because every parent has kind of distinct features and ethnicities, but their personalities, like the kids are like flippin' energetic, like all of them. A lot of them have like a red 40 allergy. And we see that with our son. If we're like pretty good about like, we don't do food dyes, but if like party or like whatever, he goes like bonkers and we're like, no. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
One of the moms, she's also a single mom by choice, has 2 kids and we've become really friendly. We're talking about like meeting up. They're in Michigan. So it's kind of cool. And, our kids don't really understand, but they know everything. And they've seen pictures of the donor that we do call their biological father. That was also something I had to wrestle with too.
Yeah.
The terminology, because especially in the gay and queer community, it's kind of like, well, you can't have 2 moms, And so we're like, no, like 2 moms can raise kids. There's this like dichotomy around like, okay, well, 2 moms can raise kids, but we do need to acknowledge for our children's sake that they have a biological father as well. So I've learned so much from the donor conceived community just about what it was like for them growing up and what it's like for them now and what do they wish was done differently for them.
Do you believe the donor-conceived community wishes was done differently? Or rather, based on the conversations that you've had with this community, how are you choosing to parent differently than you might have otherwise?
I used to call him a donor, and I used to say it was my child's donor. It's not my child's donor. It's my donor. It's their biological father. I show pictures. I say, like, whatever you want to know. Again, my son, the oldest, is 5. Like, doesn't care at this point about anything. But like, if you ever want to know anything, let me know. Like, I don't know this person. I will do whatever you want, anything you need. I always thought, and very naively of me, that like it would come up when they're 18. I'm like, oh yeah, totally. Like, the donor's open. So at 18, we're going to contact the bank, who's going to contact the donor. And yeah, sure, he could change his mind, that it's going to be like, great. It's not the case. There's identity disruptions that come up for these kids sometimes of like, where do I get this feature from? Or who is my biological grandparents or anything like that? And so I love that we've connected with the siblings so that we can be like, you have other family out there, or there's other kids that they can talk to that are going through and sharing the same experiences. But I know the biggest thing that the community wishes is that there was more medical information. Your medical information is as current as the donation, unless they've updated it, which they're not required to do.
Right. And many people whose medical information changes dramatically may not be in a position physically or with their mental health well-being to update. Right. So if you're going through a crisis, you're not going to say, oh, I'm going to go take care of this update for the registry.
Right. Or if you lose a parent. So like, I think that was the biggest thing for me when I had a daughter. I was like, I need to know now, has there been breast cancer or ovarian cancer that has come up in your family in the past 7 years? You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And so I've talked to the bank. I'm like, how do you handle this? And because of my work with my organization, like I am in touch with like the major sperm banks, and I ask all of them, how do you deal with this? How do you update things? And, you know, it really is like, they do reach out to them, but unfortunately it's up to the donor to respond.
Oh, I'm not even tied into the sperm banks the way you are. And I call the sperm bank all the time with questions. I do. When I was making my decision, I would be like, okay, these are the top 3. I've narrowed it down with my friends and my family and whatever, but I didn't have adult pictures. So I would say, which one has the best smile? And then the next day I'd come back and like, which one's eyes look the happiest, you know? Or call all the time. Is there any new information? Are there any new siblings? Are there, you know, all the time. They're like sick of hearing from me. If you're not going to advocate for yourself and your child, who is?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that the biggest thing for me that I have had to work on myself is to put my own stuff aside and to put my kids' needs, wants, desires, potential, even future ones first. And so it's not about me. And every single donor conceived person that I've spoken to are like, my parents who raised me are my parents. I can compartmentalize that. You know, like I will always be my children's mom. And they have other biological families out there as well. It doesn't take away from who I am and my role. It just adds hopefully and potentially more love. But it's a lot. And I never, ever thought about any of this. And that's really kind of what my advocacy is about. It's just like, before you even go down this road, you need to do a lot of internal work.
Let's talk about that, because you're very clear, you know, if we're going to pivot back to some of the work that you do, you're very clear about saying, here are some of the things you need to think about before you embark on this journey. And some of the stuff is technical, and then some of it is emotional. Let's break those 2 things out. What are some of the technical things somebody might need to explore before going through either a sperm donor process or having a child in certain of these states that require an adoption certificate from the parent?
Yeah, well, I think that it depends on if you're going to use a known donor or a bank. If you're using a known donor, then legal has to happen before you even start the process of trying. And in some states, you actually can't use a known donor because you cannot terminate parental rights before the birth of a child. In certain states, there's no donor statute. You got to just be really careful. You want that contract up front too, if you're in another state that allows that. If you are going through a cryobank, then you're not going to an attorney until you're pregnant. Usually in the 2nd trimester, we're going to ensure that it's a viable pregnancy, and, you know, you've got some time to get some steps in there. In terms of like the other technical stuff, I never thought about, but I now talk about and advocate for like hormone testing before you're even going to start the process of anything. estrogen, progesterone, like all of those levels. And they have at-home tests that you can do to just start checking things, to just start tracking your cycle, just having as much information as possible before you even go into that appointment. But I think the biggest preparation stuff is the emotional piece, and the emotional piece of this is not always straightforward. Our process took a lot longer than we thought. I had to have surgery, actually. I had a cyst on my ovary. Jordana had to have surgery. We had failed attempts. We had a complete pivot in our plan. And then the donor piece, which we didn't focus on because I don't know, I was naive and I didn't really know much about it, but we know better now. And there's a lot more advocacy out there for the donor conceived community of working through your own stuff, of being the non-genetic parent. And what does that mean for you? What comes up for you? Where is your resistance and hesitancy? Including the donor as part of the narrative, because people will be like, oh, well, I'm going to wait for my kid to ask. You can't do that because your kid might feel uncomfortable asking because they don't want to hurt your feelings. There's just a lot that I've learned.
It is so hard to be a parent where you put yourself second, especially when you've got these big emotions, right? It's not like we're talking about, we always use the seatbelt analogy or the oxygen mask analogy. This isn't a small thing. This is a big thing. You're grappling with major emotions around who am I? What's my worth as a parent? How's my relationship to my kid going to be? And it all takes a backseat to how your child feels about their parentage, about how they came to be.
And they take cues from you too. It's how comfortable is my parent with this topic? And if they sense that you're not, then they're not going to bring it up. And then there's a lot of internal turmoil that these donor conceived kids often can go through. And it's not even the kids that, well, they're adults now, so I don't want to call them kids, but it's not even that they were told late in life. This is also for those who were told when they were younger, but it was not a very welcome conversation.
It's a terrible analogy, but it's the one I'm going to make anyway. It's a little bit like talking about sex. If you're in a body positive, sex positive space in your family, then it's easier to ask questions about, oh, mom, this is happening in school, or I have these feelings for this other person or whatever. And if you're in an environment where it is taboo to talk about these things, your child's going to be more reluctant to bring up any sex questions that they have. Same thing with parentage to some extent.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that we just strive to make it a safe space for them to bring up anything they want. So my son is 5, right? The conversations aren't very deep. But if he does something wrong, I always say, buddy, I'm not going to be mad at you for making a mistake, but I'm going to be upset if you don't tell me the truth. So it's just like that I'm always welcoming the truth. He doesn't want to tell us if he did something wrong because he thinks that we're going to be mad at him, or he'll be like, do you still love me? Because I hit his sister. I'm like, yes, that will never change, but I need you to tell me the truth. So we just say, we'll talk about anything. Parenting is hard. It is really hard.
Yeah. And it's hard to distill parenting advice in a couple minutes on a podcast, but we appreciate about this with sensitivity is really important.
Yeah. I have a bunch of interviews with donor conceived individuals on my Instagram and stuff like that. People want to learn more about their experiences. And I think it's just important to listen to the story.
And that's exactly it. It's all about stories, right? If you can hear somebody's story, it may not feel at all relatable. And then yet you might hear something that's interesting.
Yeah. The donor conceived adults who are speaking out now are your future child.
Yeah.
Their experiences, And so for me, I was like, whoa, yeah, that's okay. I'll listen now.
Well, given all the conversations you've had in this space and the work around advocacy, providing resources, creating coursework, creating materials that will help others, you've got a lot of content knowledge. Has that shaped the way you think about family or the way that you have experienced family?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole donor conception stuff has shifted everything for me. I think that there's 2 parts to the narrative. There's the part that blood doesn't make a family, and that's true. There's chosen family. There's family that you're raised with, but blood also does make a family in terms of familial connection. And so I kind of always talk about that the word parent can be a noun and a verb, and there's a difference there. I am my child's parent in the sense of the verb. I parent my child, but my kids also have a biological parent out there as well, who's the donor. And that's the sense of the noun. He's not actively parenting, but he contributed genetic material, and that is nothing to just sneeze at. And people will be like, well, he just, made a sample and blah, blah, blah. Yes, but that sample came with a whole lot of family lineage and history and stories that are part of my kids' family tree. My kids have 3 family trees.
I like the family tree definition. I've got 2 quick questions for you. If you were to characterize your journey to where you are now, professionally and personally, or one or the other, using songs, is there a specific song that speaks to you as like, this is who I am, this is the soundtrack of my life?
Oh, man.
It's an unfair question. I acknowledge that.
So it's not a popular song at all. So you're going to have to look it up. I am obsessed with Idina Menzel. I love her. She has an album and there's a song called I Stand. And the lyrics are like, I stand for the power to change. I live for the perfect day. I love till it hurts like crazy. It's like a really beautiful sentiment. Now there's one part that's like, that they want a hero to save me, but like, no, thank you on that part. But I like the I stand for, and just like kind of empowering.
That actually, if I knew that song and were to pick a song for you, I'd probably pick something that said words like that, like standing up, presenting future optionality and information resources to others is huge.
I mean, now I'm like, I need to look up these lyrics.
I'm really curious about this.
Yeah, I love this. I stand for the strange and lonely. I believe there's a better place. Yeah, they're pretty good.
That said, if we are looking for more information about how to get the legal support that we need, how to choose a sperm donor, what to do if I'm starting to think about this process and I don't know what the first next steps are, where do we find you and your resources?
So my website has everything, connectingrainbows.org. All of the directories, like all of that, the information is free. Attorneys often will provide free consults too. Almost all the states covered now. I'm still working my way through. Some states are not as easy to find, but I did just launch a course. So it's called Fertility Foundations, and it's for those who are using donor sperm. It's literally everything you need to know from start to finish. And it covers finding a donor, the finances. It talks about all the different treatment options, the testing. It talks about the legal implications. And then there's sections on kind of like the therapy emotional piece that goes along with raising a donor conceived child.
Awesome. That's so great. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you. And there's so many things to discover on that website. So appreciate your offering it.
Of course.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.
I am thrilled to share and extend a free level 2 subscription to the California Cryobank Donor Catalog by using the promo code STORK'd, that's STORKD, at cryobank.com. You will receive free access for 90 days, which is an $145 value.